I wanted to introduce you to Chris Draft. He's the founder of the Chris Draft Family Foundation. He's also the co-founder of Team Draft. It's a national campaign that is changing the face of lung cancer. He's also a renowned speaker and an ex-NFL football player as well. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Well, I know I only have 10 minutes, so I know it's not that long, and then we have some great opportunity to have discussion. And so I want to just be able to share a little bit about my experience, and hopefully that'll help as we're moving forward with the conversations to get you kind of inspired and help you kind of see some of the details of what we need to do and the courage that it takes to have some of these conversations. So with that said, I want to give you guys a little bit more about me and really the end of my career, and that is I played in the NFL from 1998 till 2010, and so I finish up, and that's essentially 13 years in the league, and I'm back at home, and I'm working out, and I'm done, but I feel good because I'm a good football player, and I feel pretty good. And my girlfriend at the time is 37 years old. So we're looking at what is this next stage? I'm getting done playing football, this next stage of my life of us being together and creating a life together. And December of 2010, my wife, Keisha, or my girlfriend at the time, was diagnosed with lung cancer. So 37 years old, in amazing shape, and just healthy, never smoked in her life, just amazing, ends up being diagnosed with lung cancer. And so we found out the most important fact, and that is that anyone can get it. Anyone can get lung cancer. And then very quickly found out one of the other facts, and that too often lung cancer is diagnosed at late stages. So she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. So this amazing woman that is this strong and smart, graduated from Clemson with a degree in electrical engineering, and strong and healthy, all of a sudden, lung cancer. And so she had this huge choice, this choice, this 37 years old, and you have this lung cancer diagnosis hanging over your head, and she has this choice. Am I going to live? Am I going to fight to live each day knowing what I know, knowing that the numbers say, or am I going to accept death? And I can tell you that my wife did a tremendous job of fighting to live each day, regardless of what she found out, all the news that she had. And there was a lot of bad news, but she made sure she stayed focused on living and finding the joy in each day. And so I say that unfortunately, anyone can get it, stage 4, and then the numbers are just not real good. So Keisha passed away in December of 2011. But before she passed, we had a chance to get married. We got married in November of 2011. And before that day, she asked me, she said, what if we don't get presents? What if we ask our family and friends to commit to changing the face of lung cancer by supporting the community? And so transitioning from just it being about her to supporting a community. And I said that was a huge choice, the choice to live, and then this choice to fight for others. And so that's when we started our Team Draft initiative, which is committed to changing the face of lung cancer. That commitment that after Keisha passed, that we continued. I had to ask myself, though, be honest about what was actually going on for me. And I had to say, if I moved forward, could I be honest about the fact that anything that we did would not bring Keisha back? Could I accept if there was something innovation, something new, that could I be excited for the people that are benefiting from it? And am I willing to fight for those people, right? And I say I had to make those choices to be able to move forward. Who am I fighting for, right? Am I fighting for this community? But then after doing that, I had to understand the community. And so this is where I really want, as we're talking about systemic racism, this honesty that comes along with that. And so I made a decision to fight. That decision to fight was actually something I decided earlier while she was alive. When Keisha got diagnosed, the commissioner of the NFL is a good friend of mine. He said, what can we do? And I said, well, Keisha doesn't need anything because she has a tremendous team, but we want to go to the Super Bowl. and see what we need to get the number for American Cancer Society. Because I wanted, if Keisha was ready, when she was ready, we wanted to be able to hit the ground running in terms of raising money for research. So in April of 2011, I went over to American Cancer Society and with the commissioner of the NFL that set up that meeting and said, hey, we want to, when Keisha's ready, we want to work with you guys to raise money for research. American Cancer Society said, all we have is the Great American Smokeout. So the commissioner of the NFL, the full weight of the NFL that are ready to go. And they said, all we have is the Great American Smokeout. I said, no, we want to support research. My wife didn't smoke, but she's got lung cancer. We want to support research, right? And so I say that because they weren't ready. They weren't ready when she passed away. And American Lung Association wasn't ready either when they did our story before the Super Bowl. And so I say, what is your culture right now? What is the priorities of your culture? A lot of people are asking, well, people don't know that research matters. That happens too often in our lung cancer community. So people don't know research matters in the public. And so, yes, they don't, because the priorities of the community were not research. The priorities as out to the community were only prevention. So as we're talking about systematic racism, what are our priorities? What are the priorities of your community? What are the priorities of your company, right? And then the question is, are you willing to change it? So are you willing to change it? Are we going to be honest about what it is? And then are you willing to change it? So are you willing to put together a culture that's going to embrace race, diversity? Are we willing to lay that out? So are we honest about our priorities? Have we made it a priority? Is this something that we really want? Are we going to create a culture that actually embraces it? And then are we willing to fight for that culture and be authentic? Because it's not going to be easy. So because we've seen in America, change is not easy. So to be authentic is not to just say, hey, this is who we are. You can read it on a piece of paper. You can read that mission statement. You can read the values, but do you believe in those values? Do you buy into the culture, right? And then do you talk about it? Do we recognize that the culture, this is not something that just happens, but it's something that we have to embrace, something that we have to deal with, that we have to nurture every day. So as we're talking about systematic racism, the first question I want to challenge you is, do you believe that there's a problem with it? Do you even think that it needs to change? Or do you think we just need to go back? That we just need to just ignore it and it'll go away because it's really not a problem? Or do you want to move forward? Do you accept that we need to embrace race and diversity and make sure that we recognize that people are equal and will be better for it? Are we willing to create a culture that is supportive, that is embracing of that? Not just say it as a priority, but actually make it possible through our culture. Are we willing to fight for that culture? Because there's going to be people that will challenge it because they're uncomfortable with change. And they're like, no, why does it have to be that way? Why is it uncomfortable? Because if you move forward, if you want to be better, it will be uncomfortable. And are we willing to talk about it? Are we willing to be intentional about it, knowing that things can always fall back? If we are not intentional about where we're going, very easily we can go the wrong way. So the challenge with this group, validate what your priorities are. Don't be afraid to look at the historic priorities. Make it clear what your culture is. And again, don't be afraid to acknowledge where the culture has been. Fight to be authentic in who you are, but don't be so stuck in it that you can't change. And if it really matters, then it has to be something that is living. It's who we are. It's not something that's just written. It's about the way we talk and the way we act each day that validates what we want. Thank you, guys.
So we're going to start our panel now. How has white privilege impacted our movement forward against systemic racism, and how have certain individuals broken through that system? Perfect. And so anyhow, I wanted to introduce the panelists today. Thank you so much for being here. I have Lori McDaniel, who's the founder of her own company called Rainbow Bridges. I have Letitia Toledo Sherman, who's the Senior Director of Drug Discovery at the TAO Consortium. Also have Peter Hurst here, who's the President and CEO of the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. So anyhow, I wanted to start off the panel with you, Letitia. You were born in Cuba. Your father was a political prisoner. Your family fled to the US when you were only 15 years old. You were put into a high school where you actually could not speak English and had to figure out how to navigate. Yet you broke through those barriers. You have so many scientific accolades, great positions, awards, etc. Tell us more. How did you do it?
Well, I'm going to say it was not easy, and it took a lot of work and perseverance. And sometimes looking at the rear view mirror, I have to say I even surprised myself. So I can't say that I can't always kind of rationalize how things happen, but I think one of the things that really, just as a little bit of a background, at that high school, I did have kind of a guidance counselor who kind of dismissed me as anybody that had any potential. So my path became even extra difficult because I ended up, going to some place where my grades were not aligned with the, I could have gone to a better, institutions. But, that worked out really well on my own in many ways because I had mentorships from individuals that my school that recognized my potential. And I was, I guess, naive enough to know that, not to think that I wasn't able to do it. I think maybe at that point it's maybe perhaps naivete that I felt like, hey, I can do this. And I was given some really incredible opportunities to join a pharmaceutical company as an intern, and I found an incredible mentor in that program who was an African American who had understood what the path and the need for really enabling students of underrepresented minorities to break through. So that was a really strong catalyst, and I decided to go get a PhD at that point. My PhD advisor was another catalyst. His wife, he was married to someone who had gone through a lot in sort of the gender race to become who she ultimately became, a very prominent American scientist. So along the way, I've had these mentors that have been catalysts. I've had a lot of negativity as well, but I've chosen to look the other way and kind of have my goal in sight, is like where I look forward, where I want to go, rather than dwell on where I haven't been, which I think is a component to my success. It's really like you have to kind of set your own set of goals and work towards them hard. I think my path has been harder than most other people. Many times I don't sleep, even at my age and my stature. I don't sleep at night because I have projects that need completion, but I know if I don't complete, they don't get done. So that's kind of my hardworking attitude has been an important component of that. But I really want to acknowledge the role of the mentors in my life. And these mentors have been both, African Americans, Latinos, and my PhD advisor was from Maine. He was American as apple pie, but really recognized this. So it's really, being able to connect with those individuals that recognize that there is a problem and that there is a solution that could be, highly enabling other people, I think is important. And I think my role, looking back, is like I am completely aware of the hardship that took me to get here, but how those people enable me. So my role, and very cognizant of that, and I try to do as much as I can on my everyday life to actually return back, whether it's at you know, the school community, through, I participate in mentorship programs and outreach. But it really takes an effort, and I think a conscious effort, to understand that there is a problem and that there are solutions, and we can all help, even if it's small. If you can affect one individual, that can affect 10. If you can go and talk to students and tell them that they can do something. In science specifically, I mean, my sort of my role as a women scientist from a minority is, you know, I want, you know, minority students, especially, you know, girls, to understand that they can do a career in science, that they can have a family. That's another thing that even hinders some of, you know, non-dominant, anybody, like women, sometimes don't understand that they can have a family and do the job. So that is actually one thing that I've also, you know, pushed forward, is it's how do we enable women, specifically minority students, mentors these, you know, be a catalyst to those individuals, so that they can actually take a place where they belong, because there's a lot of smart people. We're underutilizing the talent of these communities, and it's a real shame, and it's got to be recognized, and we need to do whatever little we can do, or as much as we can do, to make that happen. So I have some specific examples of the things that we're doing right now to reach out. I don't know, that was if we're ready for that part of the discussion.
Not quite. That's the second round.
Okay.
Thank you, Leticia.
Okay, sure.
So at this point, Peter, for you being a man of color, the cards weren't stacked in your favor. Your parents weren't well educated. They didn't have money. Yet you became a successful lawyer. You started multiple companies. You were at top of your game in the financial industry. What was the secret to your success?
I think my parents are probably the most important piece of my puzzle. One of the things that I hadn't shared is that I was adopted. So I had the benefit of knowing my biological mother, and I have 2 brothers and a sister, and I can really say I have the story there, but for the grace of God go I, because I grew up in Houston, Texas, and unfortunately with my 2 biological brothers, things didn't work out as well for them as they did for me. But I was really blessed that my adopted parents really, you know, gave me the right values, gave me the right motivation. It was always my job to, you know, do well in school, because neither one of my parents graduated from high school, so they poured all of their energy in terms of education into me. My mother was a maid, my father was a baker, so it was a non-negotiable thing. You didn't play outside, you didn't do anything until you got your homework finished. So I would say that motivation, and all parents of color of my generation, I'm a little bit older than Chris probably, but all parents of my generation had 2 talks especially with their sons. One was, you know, you got to work twice as hard and be 3 times as good. And then the second talk was, you know, if you have an interaction with law enforcement, your job is to get home alive. So that's not the time to, you know, show what a man you are. That's the time to make sure you get home alive. But in terms of the first conversation, having that mindset where you just take it for granted that you have to be, you know, 3 times as good, you got to work twice as hard, you just accept it. And the other thing that was also a part of what my parents instilled in me is that you got to be resilient. There are going to be setbacks. If you looked at the arc of my professional and personal story, I've had setbacks, some significant setbacks, but it's not, you know, that you don't have setbacks, is that you bounce back from them. And one thing I have somewhat in common with Chris, I played football in junior high and high. I was smart enough to realize I didn't have the talent to go forward. But if you think about playing in Houston, Texas in the summer and the fall, it's hot and it's humid. I played both ways. And so I knew by the 4th quarter, I was going to be exhausted. And so the only way you got through is to say the guy on the other side of the ball was even more exhausted. And so you just block it out. So as a person of color, you use that same mindset. I know things are not going to be fair. I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm just going to keep pursuing what I'm trying to pursue. And the other thing, you just always, for me, I didn't have anything to go back to. So I always had to face forward. So if I failed, it had to be a temporary failure, because if it was a permanent failure, I didn't have a nest egg, I didn't have a trust fund, I wasn't born on third base. So that really does motivate you, and it focuses you. And in addition to my parents, it really is always important, to have mentors. I can't, just, not dwell on that enough. I had, in addition to my parents, who were my role models, my first job after law school was working for a federal judge, a black judge in Detroit, who was on the United States Court of Appeals, and he was like a father figure to me. And one of the things he told me is that, my first job, first year with him, you make mistakes, but I knew anytime I made a mistake and he chewed me out, it wasn't because of racism, it was because I had screwed up. And the second thing that was an invaluable lesson that sort of stays with me to this day, he said, you're going to be a lot of times the first person of color in a situation. You're going to be the only person in the room. And if you don't make a difference, if you don't say what needs to be said or do what needs to be done, then why be there? And so that has always stuck with me, because I have, had the good fortune of being in different positions where I was the only person of color in the room, but the first person of color in the organization. And I tried to always keep the judges, words, in the back of my mind, and keep me focused on, you really need to try to do the right thing when no one's looking, because that is the definition of character, but also the definition of courage. And then the final mentor I'll mention is I had a guidance counselor my senior year in college. I was going to apply just to the University of Texas and call it a day. And she said, look, you really have the grades and the scores to apply to a lot of different schools. And then my second retort was, well, I don't have any money for the application. She said, well, they have fee waivers. I had no concept of that. So I applied to several schools based on the advice of my guidance counselor, who happened to be African American. So I think that was very important, because I easily could have had a guidance counselor who said, look, you should just, go to community college or something like that. And it really did change the arc of my personal life and my professional life. So I say I'm blessed. The things I've done, I'm pleased with, but none of that really matters in terms of, when you're breathing your final breath. No one is ever going to talk about how much money did I make, what positions did I have. It's going to be, did you do something, with your life? Because I think we all have a purpose as to why we're here. Did you do something with your life that made a difference? And so whatever that is, when I draw my last breath, I hope that I can say that I did do something. So it wasn't just about superficial things. It wasn't just about making money. I made money, I've lost money. But did you do something to try to leave the place that you arrived at, for me, a number of years ago, better than when you leave it?
Thank you so much, Peter. And Lori, with yourself, you were a woman of color growing up in predominantly white environments. You went to a white school, etc. And one of the things that you said to me is your parents instilled in you to be hyper aware of how you were being perceived. And you climbed the corporate ladder, but you weren't happy. And tell us more about why you started Rainbow Bridges. I know it focuses on systemic racism as well as white fragility.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. Well, I think my story sounds a lot. There are themes, of having familial, involvement as mentors and as guides. And I was listening to Peter's story, and reflecting on the different people who encouraged me at different times throughout my life as well. And yes, my parents were very much, and my grandparents, you know, and my great grandparents, really on both sides, they were all very invested in having their children and that next generation flourish and go beyond in every way, both materially, intellectually, in terms of self-actualization, right? Like really go beyond the generation before it. That's definitely a theme in many families, and definitely in my family as well. And so I grew up in Southern California in Orange County a long time ago now, much longer than I'd like to admit. And it was predominantly a white environment. And then I went into a you know, really great education. My parents were completely committed that my sister and I had like the best, you know, like the best in education, the best neighborhoods, you know, the best, right? Whatever the best is, which in America means that it's going to be predominantly white. And so I then went into, you know, a prestigious mostly white university, and then went into a corporate career, right? And sort of spent about 15 years climbing. And to your point, yeah, I wasn't happy. You know, I got up to the top of my industry and peaked in. You know, this was about 5 years ago. I kind of peeked in the door. I got in the door of the top, right? And I spent a little time there, and I thought, you know, this really just isn't fulfilling. I really thought it was going to be more fun up here, and more satisfying. But really, at the end of the day, like you were saying, Peter, you know, I wanted to leave a legacy and really make more of an impact with my life, and I wanted to be more in that in a daily way too. And when I looked around, the people around me were good people, but their focus was different. And I really wanted to make a difference in the fact that I was, you know, when I looked back at my career, my life, I was pretty much always the only person of color. Sometimes there was another person of color, not many Black folks though, right? And definitely not many people of color in general. And so I found myself sort of scratching my head, you know, and thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do with my life? And what does really matter to me? And what I really realized is that women, right, like really empowering women matter, and then really empowering and making a real impact in people of color and in their lives. And yes, my parents were also very, very intentional about making sure that my sister and I were very conscious and intentional about how we were being perceived throughout life, like in any situation. You know, we used to get in trouble if we didn't have the right table manners. You know, so I don't use all my etiquette, but I know all the etiquette. You know, my mother was like, "You will know this," right? And you know, being articulate. Very, you know, my parents would stop us mid-sentence and actually have us repeat what we were saying, not only for enunciation, but also for like word choice. You know, how can you, okay, that's a great idea, now start over. How can you say that and use different words, you know, really sell it, really make your communication land with me. Right. So they were very, and they were also really, we were girls, so we weren't as susceptible to violence with law enforcement, but they had the talk with us too. You know, they were like, you don't want to be having an attitude with law enforcement. If you find yourself getting pulled over, this is what you do. This is what you say. This is what you behave. This is how you behave. And if you don't do that, your life will be in danger, you know, and they were right. And I have been in those situations, and their teaching and their wisdom has come in very handy many times. Does that answer all of your questions, Pam?
Yeah, well, just what I thought it would be great is just to go a little bit more into racism and white fragility from the perspective of why you started the company, because I think that's really important and very key to this discussion.
Great, thank you. I knew I was forgetting something there. Perfect. Yeah, I'm so passionate about transforming systemic racism. And what happened was along the way during my corporate career, I began to develop myself outside of work as a transformational coach and facilitator. It's just a passion of mine, just a passion. And so I've been doing that kind of like a ministry almost, on the side for many years with both individuals and also with large groups too. And late, I've really turned my focus to using those skills in terms of race, and really making an impact there. And what I've really discovered is that, I'm on a mission to have people get all on the same page around what racism is and isn't. Because, right now we have a lot of people of color who see racism as a systemic thing, and it's not, that's how we kind of see it. We see all the like moving pieces of it. We can see that it's mass incarceration and food deserts and law enforcement issues. And, there are not enough people in corporate, right, et cetera. There are all these moving pieces of it. It's systemic. And then you have a lot of white people who haven't been educated to that, and it's just kind of invisible to them. And the definition of racism for them is more, it's like in the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, she explains it really well. People see it as bad, mean people doing bad things to other people, right? And if you're not consciously doing bad things to other people, to people of color, then you are not racist or participating in racism at all. And if you bring that up, right, if a person of color then brings up racism and tries to address it in some way, most white people will take that as an attack on their moral character, right? Well, I'm not a bad person. What are you talking about? But usually that Black person or person of color of any color is actually addressing the system and just trying to make a positive change. And that causes this huge breakdown in communication that Robin DiAngelo and others call white fragility, like that sort of discomfort and defensiveness that a lot of white people experience when they understandably feel that they're being attacked in some way morally. And so I'm on this mission. I kind of had this epiphany earlier this year where I thought, great, okay, this is it. This breakdown, this gap, I'm going to live in this gap, and I founded Rainbow Bridges recently, actually, to provide what's needed there in terms of coaching, facilitation, talks like this, because I want to close that gap, get everyone on the same page, because most people care about this and want to do the right thing.
So much, Lori. And to kind of wrap things up with the next round of questions, Letitia, I wanted to see if there were any takeaways that you could recommend that people could start implementing right away to start making a difference as an individual, and then also what your consortium is doing around the area of race and gender equality. You're not unmuted. You know what we could try to do is let's see, while you're trying to get unmuted, Peter, you really focus on the area of supplier diversity, and there's some McKinsey reports that you shared with us that really show it's not just the right thing to do, it's also really good for businesses. So I wanted to see if you could expand upon that.
Sure. If I could just, analytically separate diversity and inclusion from supplier diversity, because both are very important. The McKinsey studies you referred to talked about diversity and inclusion And there were 3 studies. One was in 15, one in 18, and one in 2020. And the basic premise of the studies is that they documented that those companies that had gender and ethnic diversity at the executive level, so both the executive suite and the board, had superior financial performance. And they documented it and reinforced the research each time they updated the studies. And I thought that was very important, because if you think about this country, it's becoming more diverse. And so therefore, if you have diversity at the leadership level, that means you're really, picking up all threads of what consumers want. You have probably a more effective decision-making process and result. You have a more engaged workforce, and you're closer to what's going to make your customers happy. So it really is, something that once you share with someone that superior financial performance is highly correlated with ethnic and gender diversity, you're half the way there. With respect to supplier diversity, which is what my day job is, we're really focused on economic inclusion and minority business development. And as we all know, there's a racial wealth gap in this country. The median net worth for a white family is about 10 times that of a median net worth for a Black family, and about 9 times that for a Hispanic family. And if you think about the implications of that, and while there are a lot of things you can do to reduce the racial wealth gap, minority business development is one very straight line from where we are to where we ought to be. And just to give you a very quick example, one of the things we all do is when we hear about minority businesses, we think about small and struggling. And that's certainly part of the continuum. But if you look at, in our council, which is New England based, we have about 250 minority-owned businesses we work with. They have aggregate revenue of like $2.7 billion. And they have 20,000 employees, 65% of whom are people of color. And of all of the 250 or so minority-owned businesses we've certified, 55% of the businesses and 55% of that aggregate 2.7 billion in revenue are companies owned by Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. So they are really doing something to reduce the racial wealth gap. And that's important because companies 45 years ago got involved with our network. We're part of a national network that includes the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And there are 22 other regional councils. 45 years ago, they got involved because it was, quote unquote, the right thing to do. But now when you think about those kinds of numbers, because we actually did an economic impact study for our region, and again, this is just a small subset of the total pool of minority-owned companies, they had a GDP contribution of $4.3 billion. So that is the kind of thing that gets the attention of CEOs, of boards of directors, and CFOs, because everyone's fighting for market share in this environment. So if you need to make, and you should want to make communities stronger, a racial wealth gap does no one any good. It doesn't do people of color any good. It doesn't do corporations any good. It doesn't do non-minorities any good. To the extent we have this massive, massive wealth inequality, we really have a society that's fractured. We really have a society that's at risk. And one of the things I'll just sort of end this segment with, I think in terms of both diversity and inclusion, in terms of what we do with supplier diversity, if you think about the flip side, I would suggest there was a movie I saw back in the mid-90s, White Man's Burden. I would recommend everyone find that movie and view it, because in that movie, the society is turned upside down. Black people represent the upper class and white people are the underclass. It was Harry Belafonte and John Travolta. It will change your perception about, white fragility doesn't have to be about, thinking you're being deemed a racist and a bad person because there is systemic racism. It really is just about power. In this country, race and power have become synonymous. And it's one way to have an honest, non-threatening look at what the real connection is between power and race.
Hey, thank you. So let's Letitia, it looks like you're unmuted. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I was muted multiple times. So I kind of, break it down by, I would say, access in different brackets by sort of age and stage in your career. So I think it's important to recognize that the earlier we get to empowering smaller children, to believe it's not just good enough to kind of enable them to move by moving what's there, but is really empowering them from the beginning, like teaching kids that, you can do things, right? So outreach at the elementary school, at the middle school, whatever that, passion of yours is if it's business, like empowering, children early on to be passionate about, participating, being a participant, expecting to be participant, not showing what the problem is so much, but really just letting them know that they can do it by making yourself a role model. So I've participated in that context, and for example, whenever opportunities, not like it's not very busy, but whenever the opportunity presents, I'm a regular of women in science forums, so graduate women in science forums. I'm often a panelist and advisor, mentor. And then there's a society called SAGNAS. It's Society for the Advancement of the Chicano and African, and Mexican scientists, but is now a very inclusive minority organization. So I also mentor that. So I recommend that everyone, find out what it is that, way that they can impact, like the next generation. And at the work level, the foundation, I feel very fortunate to be in a position right now to work. I work for a research foundation. It's a family, very generous family, that has identified these neurodegenerative diseases as diseases that they wanted to invest, because the father died of, Richard Rainwater died of a tauopathy called PSP. And it's an ongoing conversation for us, is how can we include, you know, people of color and different, and gender equality and equity into our funding. So one of the things we're doing, I follow, I'm new to the foundation, so I've been in the field for many years as a scientist, working in sort of science research and at a management level for about 20 years, but only at this foundation for 2 years. And there's scientists in neuroscience. We don't have any in our portfolio that are African American. So this is an active discussion that we have now. How do we reach that community? Because there's a lot of talent. I follow Black and Neuro. I'm trying to get more involved in that community so that we can understand how we can bring them in. Also, the research, the interesting thing, and Rich and Chris, you really echo something. Often these communities are absent from clinical studies, right? When we study diseases, we don't study diseases of communities of color, right? So we're now funding studies that look at Latin America, and we're really having an active conversation on how we can include disadvantaged community where you have, these, health inequalities into the research. How can you include them in your clinical trials, engage them as, population, so that your drugs can work on them as well. So that's another one. At the SAB board, we're adding 2 new SAB members. We don't, the really important thing is to remember is that there's a lot of talent. It's really, we're not making any concessions by bringing someone with a diverse background into the conversation. It is there. It's just that they're not actively, seeked. So that's a part that we're conscious decision. We're adding new science advisory board, and they're going to be really great, and they're going to do a really good job for what we need them to do them. But we're actively seeking that. So I really believe that there is an opportunity to seek where the talent is without compromising the talent, which is really important, right? We're not just, saying we're going to bring someone in because they fit a criteria. No, we're going to find someone in who's really good at what they do, and they are there. They just have not been visible. And that's kind of, I think, the conscious choice that we're making, is really bringing the invisible to being visible. So I think that's really, and I think I'm very fortunate that I work with individuals that are really of that mindset. I think this is an effort that we're actively, we just had a conference, and some of our principal investigators, had the first slide in their presentation was Black Lives Matter. They've made commitment to include research associates and graduate students into their labs. And I have to say, it's a beautiful movement that's happening in the scientific community it's really one that I'm really proud to be part of the solution, and again, we can focus on the problems. There are many, but I think it's most important to focus on whatever we could do, as little as it could be, to get to a solution that we can bring out, the talent. And I mean, Peter, you're speaking, I've learned a lot from your discussion, and Lori, and Chris, obviously, of what we could do to kind of even, bring that conversation even to a higher level. So thank you. I think that's my message. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Leticia. And we're actually at the end of the panel, but Lori, I just wanted to give you a chance to see if you had any closing remarks on things that people could do. And I also wanted to read something that Benalita Ellie wrote, which I think is an excellent idea, is when is racism an appropriate happy hour topic? And I think absolutely anytime. She said, in the ideal world, I would like my employer to hold happy hours in which we're talking about sex and gender disparities, trans rights, racism, and an intentional happy hour, immigration, labor practices, racialized access to financial success. So Lori, I don't know if you want to do that, and I think that might be a new BVS happy hour idea as well. So Lori, I don't know if you had any closing remarks.
Sure, and I'll make it quick. I know we need to wrap up and move on, and this has been so rich, and I've enjoyed it so much, and I love your idea of an intentional happy hour. I'll be there. I would really invite organizations to do a couple of things. One is to really, if they haven't done a DEI, right, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or inclusivity type of initiative over a sustained period of time, I would invite organizations to begin that process and to really see it as a long-term commitment that's not going to just be to check the box, but to actually be an introspective growth opportunity for both the leadership and, the individuals of the company, because a company, an organization, is really only as good as its individuals, and its executive leadership is really made of individuals, right? So that's thing one. And then thing two, I would invite organizations to step into the exciting and uncomfortable realm of exploring white privilege and white fragility as part of those initiatives, like making that a cornerstone. That's a cornerstone of my work. And it's because it really gets to the source of the issues that often are the obstacles to DEI initiatives failing. There's this there are things that are hidden from our view because people are uncomfortable and haven't made that long-term jump in, and like, we're going to do this. All right, go team. Might take us a while to get there, but we're going to get there. It might be uncomfortable at times what we're doing it. When you have that kind of a commitment to it with I'm a proponent of having the white fragility body of work integrated, you'll be able to have way more success at removing those obstacles to your initiatives and then your outcomes as well.
Thank you so much, everyone, for this very informative and lively discussion. And we're going to send everybody back to the virtual conference room where we can do networking, and then welcome everybody to come back for panel number 2. Thank you.